Hello mate, welcome back to the channel. We are back with another Ascendancy class design for Path of Exile 2. If you're new to the series, we are making up a load of Path of Exile Ascendancies. We've designed a whole tree and interface and tried to make it feel as realistic as we could, whilst we basically cope until early access. So it's not far away now. We're at 19 of 36, and the 19th Ascendancy class we're going to be taking a look at is the Shaman. Let's get into it. Alright, here is an overview of the presentation screen. As you can see, we've got a little bit of a mix. We've got a trio node and a duo node in there, a couple of T2 nodes, which I think are quite powerful. But before we get into the nodes themselves, I always like to start these videos off. Let's take a look at a little bit of kind of lore we've written and then discuss the themes and the broad concept of what we're trying to achieve with the Shaman class. For a Shaman, the natural world is not just a home, it is part of their very being. Some believe that the gods will save them from themselves, though it is that very nature that will be their refuge against the coming storm. A shaman accepts the fury and devastation within them, as well as the gentle and calm, and in doing so finds the true power of our birthright. To know that we are not servants of false idols, but are a part of the very earth that gives us life. Remember this, study it, and perhaps you too may channel its unfathomable might. Alright, so now let's talk about the themes and what we're trying to kind of get across and offer the player in this little niche Ascendancy. So we've got power, weather, seasons, and totems. So totems obviously being a mechanical thing, but the others being more of a like thematic guide. And I think the key thing here is to try and create a distinction mechanically between the way that the Shaman uses elements and the way that the Elementalist would use elements, so that you've got this kind of raw magic sorceress kind of elemental user, and then you've got something that's a bit more nature-based and earthbound. So you'll see that in the themes as we get into the nodes now. Alright, I think the perfect place to start off is going straight down here. We've got some increased elemental damage and all LE resistances, and then we've got a duo node, and this really sums up, I think, just offering straight away an opportunity to really control how you want to be using elements or not. So you've got matter on the right here. Your skills convert all physical damage into elemental damage based on the skill's damage types. If the skill deals only physical damage, then split the damage evenly across all elements. So a really important flexible point here is that we want to be offering the player a way to boost their elemental damage based on the skills that they're using. So instead of this saying, oh, okay, this is going to split into fire or cold or something specific, what this is doing is saying, okay, you're using Ice Crash, then we're going to take the physical portion of Ice Crash and turn it to cold, right? Whatever's contextually relevant to that skill. I think that's a really easy, simple, and elegant way to offer the player way more options in terms of the skills they use and the elements that they want to use in their build. On the other side to this, we've got Earth. And so this does almost the opposite thing. It converts all elemental damage into physical damage at 80% rate. So this is if you really wanted to go counter to the point and really ground yourself. And I don't know the number on this exactly. 80% could be too high. There's going to have to be some kind of diminishment because of the way that you can stack elemental damage, and then that converting into like huge stun potential and stuff like this. So that rate conversion will need to be balanced. But the idea here is, yeah, that you can, if you want to, take a fire-based mace that you've rolled a load of wicked elemental mods on, and then turn that into like a big, heavy-hitting, grounded stun. I think that's a really cool idea. It offers something quite unique that just doesn't exist in the game. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to move over to the left and we're going to look at a defensive option here. So you've got all LE res and then some max life and energy shield. And then we've got seasonal conditioning. A druid is known to all seasons, harsh and fair. Each time you are hit with an element, take 5% less damage from that element for 4 seconds, maximum of 5 stacks. Reductions to your elemental resistances have 80% reduced effect. So let's take the top part of this, 2 parts of this node. You're getting conditional less damage taken to elements that has to stack up. So say you're getting really zerged down by a cold imbued mob or something like that, then as they're attacking you, you're going to be building more and more resistance to that. And then it fades off over time. So this isn't something you permanently have. You could get one shot quite easily with a big single attack, but as you're taking more and more damage from, say, you're against a fire boss and they're doing lots lots of fire damage to you, you're building up that resistance. I think that's just a really flexible, interesting defensive layer. So on the bottom here, we've got quite a powerful and build enabling section of the node, which is reductions from all sources. So that includes things like items, cursives, passives. The only thing that wouldn't be included in this is the act debuff. Unless they felt that this was underpowered and they wanted to boost it up, they could do that. So what I'm thinking here is any interaction where from your items you're getting negative resistances. Now that could obviously be curses as well, but specifically with items, I think this would be really interesting where you've got a unique ring that gives you -60 to lightning resistance, but it gives you lucky lightning damage or something like that, right? This is a way to essentially mitigate most of that downside. Now let's move across up to, let's get into quite a key kind of part of this, a 2-tier branch here. And we've got a elemental damage and LE resistances again. And then we've got Skycaller. The sky calls to you and you to it. Gain attunement to each element based on the amount of time casting or attacking with elemental skills. The important first line here, this is kind of like attack speed, cast speed agnostic. So say you're casting really slow big spells, or you're attacking really fast and doing lots of different things. This is going to give you that same kind of build-up of buff, and I thought this was an elegant way to do that. And then we've got enemies gain 1 stack of covered in ash, snow, or static per second, up to 10 stacks based on your current highest attunement. Each stack grants, for ash, that's 3% less movement speed, 3% increased fire damage taken. For snow, less attack and cast speed, and increased cold damage taken. And then we've got static, which is chance to be luckily struck, and increased lightning damage taken. So you can get 30% up to 30% of these with your 10 stacks. So the way that this is working is very similar to Trinity. It's tracking what element have you used the most of recently and kind of filling a bar based on that. And whatever your highest is, every enemy in your presence, essentially every enemy on the screen, is going to be building stacks up of that relevant elemental debuff. The cool thing about this as well is that this lasts indefinitely. So this isn't a debuff that wears off. And so if you are oscillating between multiple different elements, then you're eventually going to build up all of these layers of ash, snow, and static debuffing the enemy. So if you wanted to double down on Skycaller, then we've got another quite powerful effect that you can add on top of it. You're getting some LE resistance and life and energy shield. And then we've got Attuned nature. So this now allows you to build up stacks of ash, snow, or static across the top 2 attunements that you've got. So the 2 elements that you've used most recently, you're going to be building up those, so you're getting those stacks up much quicker. And then your shape-shifting skills and minion skills convert all physical damage to match your current highest attunement. Now, I really wanted to add this line in. I love it that it's in there because this adds a very interesting option to the player but doesn't draw back. So straight away you're getting a very powerful effect with the highest 2 attunements here. But then if you did want to then add in some shape-shifting or minion skills into your build, then this is also benefiting them and they're gaining some interesting effects based on the fact that you've kind of built up these attunements. So it's just an interesting way to offer a lot of diversity just on like one half of a node. Instantly this Ascendancy now becomes an interesting shape-shifting or minion option. So I thought that was a kind of elegant way to do that. I've said the word elegant lots of times in this video, but it's fine. I don't want to big myself up too much. Now, before we go on to the next kind of the really big elemental damage and ailment stuff, let's come over to the left-hand side and take a look at these nodes. So we've got elemental resistances, increased effect of shrines, and then we've got nature's grace. Got 25% chance to avoid all debuffs, and then you have an elemental shrine buff with 25% increased effect. The shrine buff changes once you have been in the presence of an enemy for 10 seconds. So very regularly this is going to be changing, it's constantly evolving, but the specific shrine buffs you're getting are elemental shrine buffs. So in PoE 1 we had shocking shrines and freezing shrines, and what we've done to cover the elements, we've added an inferno shrine. So essentially each of these shrines has a nova effect, so you're getting shock nova or ice nova, and then I imagine we could add a skill called flame nova, and you're getting this pulse of elemental damage that's kind of periodically every second coming out from you. But then also it's creating ground effects. So you've got chilled ground, burn ground, and shock ground. We're also getting 25% increased effect of these elemental shrine buffs, so that's not only increasing the damage, but also increasing the effect of the ground effects, which is pretty fun. And then we've got a totem node. We had to get a totem node in here. And I know that they're quite keen not to kind of overemphasize one specific playstyle in each Ascendancy. So I've just given this like one node that I think is quite powerful and changes the way totem gameplay could work. So you're getting some placement speed and range. And then we've got Spirit in Stone. Give voice to your silent kin. Your totems become living creatures that can move freely. You get +2 maximum totems and +1 totem skill cooldown use. You also get 100% increased maximum life of your totems and 50% increased totem duration. So if we take a look at a couple of totem skills that have been revealed in the game so far. So as you can see, we've got Ancestral Warrior Totem, Dark Effigy, and Shockwave Totem. And it looks like they're really trying to explore a lot of different ideas and gameplay mechanics, as they're doing with a lot of the skills in PoE 2, and apply that to totems. So if we just take our Ascendancy node and then look at Ancestral Warrior Totem, now all of a sudden that totem isn't fixed in place, and that Warrior Totem essentially becomes like a golem, and they can move around and fight for you. So you're instantly getting a lot more quality of life and mobility, plus the fact you can now summon 2 of these totems. And I've put the totem skill cooldown use in because we don't know if there's going to be, we know there's certain things like Hammer of the Gods. Alright. As a cooldown is this big effect, so maybe we get some totems that are like that, where it's like a incredibly powerful totem, and this would allow you to use that cooldown twice. Hopefully for you totem players out there, it gives a bit of love, it creates an interesting new mechanic, and then I'm sure there's going to be stuff on the passive tree as we've seen, like Ancestral Bond, but also there's going to be items and things that can increase and play around with totem gameplay as well. Alright. Now, this is kind of the, I think, probably the most iconic or interesting group of nodes. We've got a trio node, which essentially play around with ailments a lot, and then we've got a sort of raw shamanic power node. So we'll start off, you're getting elemental damage and increased ailment effect, and then we've got these 3 nodes here. And what all of these do is change the way the ailments are going to be working in a unique way that would be different to an elementalist. So Geostatic, Cataclysm, and Storm. We'll start off with Geostatic, and this is about combining elements and then getting a new ailment effect from ailments that you're inflicting. So if an enemy's shocked and chilled, they gain Induction. Enemies with Induction reflect 50% of the damage they deal back to themselves. If an enemy is shocked and ignited, they're affected by Charred. Charred enemies deal 50% of their non-elemental damage as a random element. So this could be a huge damage taken as fire, as cold, as lightning. If you're buffing up your elemental resistances using something like Seasonal Condition, then you're going to be able to sort of mitigate a hell of a lot of damage if you can shock and ignite an enemy. And then we've got Chilled and Ignited on the bottom, where you're inflicting Extremity. And enemies with Extremity receive 75% increased effect of ailments on them. And obviously there's a way for you to inflict all of these, so that could be very powerful, but you've got to find a way to keep up these ailments on enemies all the time. Alright, next let's come down to Storm. The Sound of Thunder will be their last warning. Gain 1 stack of Storm per monster power within 5 meters. So you're fighting a unique enemy, that's going to be 20 power. Maybe they've got another rare there, that's another 10 power. And a few adds and normal monsters, that's a 3-4 extra power. So you're looking like, 30 power maybe in a situation. Enemies lose 1% movement speed per stack of Storm, and you gain 1% increased evasion rating per stack of Storm. Every second you have an equal chance to your Storm stacks to be struck by lightning. So let's say that's a 30% chance per second if you're against a rare and a unique enemy. So every second you're getting 30% chance to get struck by lightning. This strike restores 20% of your energy shield and begins your energy shield recharge. So the idea of the mechanic here is that as you're around enemies and you're around a lot of enemies, you have a chance to be struck by lightning, and that's going to kickstart your energy shield and constantly restore your energy shield. Then we've got the bottom line here, which is if you're struck by lightning whilst you're at full energy shield, then you electrocute nearby enemies. We know that electrocute is a new sort of stun effect that's based on lightning ailment scaling, and you can inflict electrocute through various lightning skills. So this is much more of a defensive node, even though you'd perhaps think Storm, you're going to be, striking enemies with lightning. This is all about you becoming like a conduit to that storm and absorbing the lightning and then it empowering you defensively. However, if you do like the idea of just summoning a pure cataclysm of destruction, then we have our next node, which is Cataclysm. What can feel like the end shall be a beginning. So this is essentially, each of the elements has their own interesting kind of like weather, kind of cataclysmic effect that's constantly going on around you. Lightning bolts periodically electrocute enemies, focusing on higher power enemies first. Once electrocuted, the bolt will spread to other enemies if it still has charge. Higher power enemies absorb more charge. An ailment effect increases charge. So I've left this a little bit amorphous as numbers because there's so many variables in this that it would need, like, you know, the actual balance team to know how this would balance out. But the idea is that you can increase your ailment effect and it's going to increase the charge that these lightning bolts fire down at. And the focus here is that they're focusing on rare and higher power unique enemies so that you're constantly going to be hitting them and electrocuting them. Then you've got chilled ground, appears randomly within 10 meters of you. This is the cold element of this. So the ground is constantly freezing in patches that are around you on screen. And then each second enemies are on this ground, they're gaining a stack of hoarfrost. So in PoE 1, what hoarfrost does is it increases the duration of the next freeze you apply to the enemy by 20%. And if that freeze doesn't meet their ailment threshold, so it doesn't actually freeze them, then it will keep stacking until you eventually inflict a freeze. So it's a way of kind of building up freeze until you reach a certain threshold that the enemy has for their ailment threshold. Now, in PoE 2, this is probably going to work quite different. So hoarfrost could do something like have a 20% increased effect of the freeze amount that you apply to their freeze debuff, something like that. But the idea here is you're spreading chilled ground that's giving this quite unique hoarfrost stacking debuff on the enemy, allowing you to freeze them a bit more easily. And then on the bottom, we've got snaking fissures create walls of fire between enemies that you kill, lasting 2 seconds at their peak. Ailment effect increases the duration of these snaking fissures. So imagine you've got 100% increased ailment effect, which with this class and the way you'd be focusing around this, you might be able to build up quite effectively. You're then getting these like 4 seconds of these fissures, kind of like volcanic fissure or, you know, a skill like that, where the fissures are just snaking around and they're going from enemy to enemy, almost like an abyss crack, and they're summoning walls of fire. So all of this pulled together, if you can imagine the gameplay here, you take this node, then all of a sudden you're getting, you know, lightning bolts from a stormy sky that are fighting, you know, firing down and hitting powerful enemies and electrocuting them. You're getting chilled ground, which is slowing patches of enemies, and you're getting these snaking fissures after you've killed an enemy. Their corpse kind of like triggers this fissure effect, and you're getting this snaking wall of fire. So it's kind of feel very chaotic and cataclysmic. Obviously, that's the idea of it. I thought that could just be a fun thing to kind of resummon what I felt like D2 kind of had a little bit with the Druid, and just I think a lot of what we want from a Druid gameplay, a sort of Storm Master. Now, if you want to double down on this kind of ailment stuff and focusing on raw elemental power, then we've got our final node, and that is Shamanic Power. Nature's raw power in your hands. So straight away, we're getting essentially a 35% increased more elemental damage multiplier, but it's got a range, so there's a volatility to it, there's a rawness to it, which is 20 to 50%. And then we get an interesting change up. So critical strikes no longer guarantee elemental ailments. So we're going to be wanting to apply and find ways to apply our elemental ailments elsewhere. Your critical strike multiplier does not deal any extra damage. Instead, that critical multiplier is converted into elemental ailment effectiveness. So this is going back to these nodes and how things like Cataclysm are scaling off of increased ailment effect. And all of the different ailments that you might be applying, this is a way for you to really stack a ton of ailment effectiveness. And I felt like this could be what really separates, one of the things that really separates this from the Elementalist. Yes, they might get some elemental ailment effects and kind of ability to buff those. But if you really want to go to the moon with your ailment stacking, then I feel like the Shaman could be a really good option here. And using an interesting scaling vector of critical multiplier and sort of converting that over to ailment effect. So I'm a big fan of this node. I think it opens a lot of different kind of avenues of scaling through multi, obviously, but also just a different way to build your elemental builds and a different way to gain access to maybe freeze. If you really just wanted to focus on one aspect of this, then you could grab something like Geostatic or the defensive storm option. And then, you know, if you're getting chilled and igniting on an enemy, you're already getting 75% increased ailment effect on them. And then you're coming up to here and doubling down on that. Alright, so that is the tree. That's everything that I've come up with for the Shaman. Like I said, it was really important to me that it felt like it had this kind of defensiveness that was very nature-based. It was all very nature-themed, but it offered interesting elemental power and elemental spellcasting options that felt different to what we've done with the Elementalist. And I've done the Elementalist, and we will be showing that in the series very, very soon. Not the next video, but it'll be coming up soon, and then you'll be able to compare the two and think, okay, what does that offer that this one doesn't? And I think I've managed to carve out a really big difference between the two of them. So if I'm doing my favorite node, this is actually a really tricky one for this, because I really feel like they're all kind of like very thematic. Like seasonal conditioning, I think, is a really powerful build enabling element. Like it's powerful, the top line, but that bottom line of having 80% reduced effective elemental resistance reductions, that could open up so much stuff. Earth as well is a really powerful thing. Converting your elemental damage over to physical and then doing physical scaling stuff with that could be really good. I think there's so many builds that this Ascendancy could open up. That being said, okay, I love Skycaller and I love the totem node. They're very close seconds, I think. This idea of controlling weather and having these living like golem style totems would be really cool. But for me, I think it's got to be Cataclysm. And it's purely just for the feeling that as you're walking around, you're this kind of tempest of force and nature, that you're like so attuned to nature and you're so powerful that like the weather and the earth, fire fissures are coming up, you're freezing the ground, and like you're just this walking kind of hurricane of energy and destruction, and that you're not even necessarily controlling it. It's quite wild. And yeah, that just to me really, really sums up what a Druid is all about. So let me know what your favorite node is in the comments. Let me know if you think this is something that you'd want to play or how you could imagine building it. I always enjoy reading those comments. And of course, if you like these videos, then please do like the video. It helps me out a lot. And of course, if you want to see more of them, then definitely subscribe, because we have a new one of these coming out every single day until early access. We're gonna get this done, guys. We're having an absolute blast doing it. We'll be on Twitch streaming a little bit here and there, but mainly we're going to be getting these videos out. I'm going to be editing a hell of a lot to get these out every single day for you. So as always, friends, exiles, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Ta-da.